Before I settle you into tonight's story, let me just say, if you enjoy these little bedtime rambles, don't forget to tap that subscribe button and maybe leave a comment about your own favorite cozy spot. It helps me keep bringing you these sleepy, silly tales. Now then, tonight's story is about a chair. Not just any chair, my garden chair. The one that's been through summers, biscuits, wasps, and the occasional ill-timed teapot disaster. It's a story about how ordinary things can feel extraordinary once you've shared enough afternoons together. So, pour yourself a cup of something warm, find your most comfortable spot, and let me tell you the tale of the garden chair. I woke up to a day that felt pre-approved for leisure. Blue sky. A breeze polite enough to smooth the edges off everything. That soft weekend hush where even the birds seem to sing at a lower volume, as if not to disturb the neighbor's toast. I had no grand plans, which, between us, is my favorite kind of plan. A day with room in it. A day that invites you outside and promises not to rush you once you get there. I put the kettle on and stood by the sink, watching steam lift. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemons, thanks to last night's enthusiastic encounter with furniture polish, and the mugs sat on their shelf like a little chorus of options. I picked the chipped one. I always do, when I want the day to feel easy. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the patio like someone arriving early to a friendly appointment. The laundry was already on the line. 2 towels, 3 shirts, a tea towel with faded strawberries, and a rogue sock that had somehow clung to a cuff and joined the party. The breeze moved through them as if turning pages. My cat was loafed in the exact center of a sun patch, paws tucked neatly under, eyes narrowed in a look that said, "This is my job, and I take it seriously." I did a slow circuit of the garden, pretending it was inspection, knowing full well it was admiration. The wild corner was already staging its summer rebellion. Lavender spilled across the path like an extrovert at a quiet party. Mint was attempting governance, taking over any unguarded soil with cheerful determination. The single rosebush leaned toward the fence as though trading gossip with the ivy. Behind it all, the fence looked pleased to be included. I breathed in, warm sun on my face, a small nudge of cool air at my neck. Somewhere, a lawnmower murmured in the distance, proof that someone else was busy while I was about to sit down and do absolutely nothing about anything. Tea poured. 2 digestive biscuits on the saucer. Book under my arm, in case I felt like projecting an image of culture. I walked to the spot I always choose, half sun, half shade, with a view of the herb bed, and just enough of the neighbor's apple tree to enjoy the drama when the wind gets ideas. There it was, waiting by the shed, my chair, canvas seat, foldable metal frame, faded from honest service rather than neglect. When I unfolded it, it made the same mild creak it always makes, like a person remembering a joke. I gave the seat a little press, the legs a quick glance, and asked my traditional question. "We good?" No reply, but the kind of silence that felt like a nod. I sat. The canvas accepted me with that familiar, give you only get from something that has learned your say. Wait. I arranged the mug and the biscuits. I pretended to open the book, and immediately rested it on my lap like a respectable paperweight. The cat blinked at me in slow motion, which is how cats say, "Fine, you may stay." From over the fence floated the faintest suggestion of Mr. Ellis's radio. Trumpets, an easy beat, nothing that asked you to hurry. I took the first sip of hot tea and felt my busy little brain sit down and shush itself. What a luxury! The garden moved in tiny ways. A bee inspected the mint. The washing line applauded quietly. Somewhere, a pigeon landed on the shed roof, with the surprised thud of someone who's not fully thought through their landing. I settled further into the chair. I have known fancier seating in my life. Cafe chairs that wanted me to behave, office chairs that insisted on lumbar opinions, but none better than this. On a mild day, with tea and nothing urgent. It's remarkable how good a simple thing can be when you've given it your full attention. That chair and I shared history. I bought it years ago in one of those end-of-season bargain piles at the garden center, the aisle where useful things go to wait for sensible people. It had been marked down to the kind of price that makes you look for the hidden crack. I found none. I took it home like treasure. It repaid me with summers. There was the great wasp standoff of 2016, when a wasp took a deep interest in my left armrest, and I discovered my ability to move at the speed of syrup while balancing tea. There was the teapot disaster of 2019, when the entire pot leapt from the side table in a moment of melodrama, and both the chair and I smelled faintly of Earl Grey for a week. There was the robin summer, when a small bird decided the armrest was a viewing platform and left tiny thank yous that required diplomacy and a damp cloth. Every spring I unfolded the chair and gave it a ceremonial shake to remind any winter tenants that the lease had ended. Every autumn, I patted it before folding. Well done, I would say without irony. It deserved it. I should tell you my garden furniture style is whatever's still standing. I have an old wooden kitchen chair that wobbles on one leg, a little metal cafe chair that looks more comfortable than it is, and a bench that arrived from a neighbor who moved and declared mine a good retirement home for it. But the canvas chair was the favorite, the one that knew my size, the one that held secrets of biscuit crumbs and sun naps, the one that allowed me to pretend that balancing a paperback on my knee is the same as reading it. But it happened because I shifted. That's the honest truth. The sun crept. It licked at my left forearm with the slow insistence that says, "You'll be pink later and pretend you're not." So I moved. Not much. A small scoot, a gentle lean. And the chair, dear old chair, offered me the tiniest tilt in reply. At first, I thought the back right leg had found a soft pocket of soil. The garden does that. It holds little surprises under the grass where you least expect them. Then, the front left leg decided to sympathize, and the seat fabric relaxed a single breath too far. The metal frame made a quiet, weary sound, more sigh than squeak, as if confessing that perhaps, on this day, it was ready to be less of a chair and more of a story. Now, a fast collapse would have been easy. Embarrassing, yes. Tea everywhere, certainly. Biscuit shrapnel, a yelp, a quick assessment of injuries, then laughter. But no. This chair had grace. It chose pageantry. It chose slow motion. I felt myself drifting downwards, in what felt suspiciously like a polite descent. My knees rose a little. The canvas stretched, not rudely, just decisively. The legs drew inward, an inch here, an inch there, as if they'd planned a meeting in the middle and were late for it. From over the fence came Mr. Ellis's voice, kind and concerned. "You all right over there?" "Yes," I called back, too quickly, in the bright tone of someone for whom things are absolutely, definitely not all right. The cat opened one eye, and then the other, and sat up. He looked from me to the biscuits and back again, like a lifeguard debating whether a whistle would help. The tea in my hand became the most important object in my universe. I held it with the concentration of a person trying to defuse a scone. Whatever happened, the tea must survive. I adjusted the tilt of the mug by a whisper. I breathed through my nose like a yoga teacher. I considered asking the chair for just 30 more seconds of cooperation. Steady, I told it. Old friend, steady. The descent continued anyway. My seat dropped another inch. The left thigh discovered a metal bar it had not previously known intimately. I became very aware of gravity, and also of the truth that there is exactly one neighbor who will always appear at the peak of any personal drama. Mr. Ellis's radio lowered itself, as if making space for news bulletins. "Do you need a hand?" he called kindly. "I'm good," I said, meaning I'm committed to this choice now and can't think how to reverse it without losing a biscuit. And then, with a soft, resigned thump, I arrived at the bottom of the journey. Not the ground, but lower than dignity expects. From this angle, I could see under the garden table with new intimacy. A spider had written a short poem there. I gave it an appreciative nod. I sat very still. I took a heroic sip of tea. Success. Not a drop spilled, a personal record. The cat, realizing I was not dying, performed the universal feline gesture of concern, a prolonged theatrical yawn. He then wandered off to inspect the herb bed, like a health inspector concluding the establishment could remain open. Eventually, I tried to stand. Now, here's where things became undignified. The chair did not want me to leave. It clung to me. It folded. It expressed opinions. It became, briefly, a fabric octopus with boundary issues. I wrestled it with the kind of politeness one reserves for a reluctant toddler. "Come now," I said, as if reasoning with metal and canvas had ever worked. "Let go." I stood, triumphant and slightly creaky. I turned and regarded the chair with the careful look we save for dear friends who have surprised us in odd ways. One leg had bent inward, like a knee knocked at a funny angle. The canvas seat sagged the way elastic gives up on an old sock. The frame leaned into itself, as if feeling contemplative. It was not broken exactly, but it was also not broken. I folded it as best I could, which is to say, not very well at all, and leaned it against the shed beside the cracked watering can, the plastic flamingo with one good eye, and the lawnmower that responds best to compliments. I fetched the old wooden chair from the kitchen, the one with a wobble, the one with a cushion that has seen stories. I placed it in the same spot and sat carefully, as if introducing two strangers at a party. 20 minutes later, the gate clicked. Susan arrived like a small parade, carrying a paper bag that smelled illegal in at least 3 countries. She walked straight toward the leaning canvas relic and arched an eyebrow. "What on earth happened?" "It retired," I said, "in the middle of its shift. You broke it, didn't you?" "It broke itself," I said, with the saintly composure of a person who knows this is technically true in at least a philosophical sense. She opened the bag to reveal 2 custard tarts, still warm, which felt like a human rights issue in pastry form. We ate them with the reverence they deserved. We discussed the way custard fills the spoon, but also somehow bounces. We dropped crumbs the cat pretended not to want, and then ate with astonishing speed. We were, briefly, the happiest people alive. Mr. Ellis's head appeared over the fence like the world's friendliest periscope. "All sorted?" "Sorted," I said, which, depending on your definition, meant The chair's now meditating against the shed, and we are eating custard. He nodded, decided this passed for a situation resolved, and vanished again, his radio reviving a brass tune that sounded like a marching band attempting to nap. When Susan left, I sat there a while, thinking about chairs, about the humble ones, the ones that show up for you over and over, the ones that don't care what you're wearing, or whether you're reading, or merely posing with a paperback while gazing at a bee, the ones that hold you when your mind is whirling, and somehow slow the whirling down to match the pace of the washing line. I thought about replacing it. I mentally wandered through catalogs I do not own. A sturdy wooden bench, a lounger with a cup holder that claims to fit most mugs but never mine. One of those padded recliners that look like small yachts on legs. Even a hammock, though my relationship with gravity suggested that would be a short, chaotic romance. And yet, I looked at the chair by the shed. For nearly a decade, it had given me a place to sit and breathe. It had accepted biscuit crumbs in the weight of afternoons. It had partnered with the sun to warm my shoulders, and with the shade to save my nose. It had held the lightest parts of my life. It deserved something. Not an unceremonious trip to the tip. A farewell. A little one. A sweet, funny, quiet goodbye. I could see it. A tiny ceremony. Nothing formal. Just me. A few words of thanks. Perhaps Susan rolling her eyes, and then making a speech that starts with mockery and ends with a toast. Mr. Ellis offering a wry comment over the fence. The cat wearing a ribbon for 7 minutes before removing it, and pretending he never agreed. I would serve tea. Possibly 2 biscuits per person. I would stand the chair up one last time. We would celebrate use. We would applaud a life of service measured in cups of tea and chapters almost read. I decided then it would be tomorrow, late afternoon, just enough sun to make the lavender smell like a memory, just enough breeze to lift the bunting I would definitely not put up. I might put up the bunting. We have to live after all. I went inside and wrote a note I did not deliver. Chair farewell, tomorrow at 4. Tea will be emotional, biscuits will be supportive. I placed it on the counter and laughed at myself. I've always loved a ceremony. It's how I tell the day I noticed it. Before bed, I took one last look at the garden. The canvas chair stood by the shed like a tired knight who had hung up their armor. The washing line had fallen still. The mint was whispering to the chives about empire. The cat sat in the doorway, half in, half out, the way he likes to be when the world is behaving. Daiki. I slept well. I dreamed I was floating an inch above the lawn, perfectly balanced, tea safe in my hand, the chair sturdy beneath me, the way it always had been when I needed it most. In the morning, the sun arrived early with a quiet drum, and I began to plan a farewell fit for a faithful seat, knowing full well that small plans in this house have a talent for becoming slightly bigger, slightly sillier, and somehow exactly right. But that, my friend, is a story for part 2. For tonight, the day closes like a soft book. The chair rests. And I do too. I woke up early the next morning with a feeling I usually associate with birthdays and fresh bread. The sort of feeling that says, something small and excellent will happen today. I lay there for a minute, listening. The house was still. Somewhere down the lane, a dog did a single bark, like punctuation. Sunlight was already sneaking around the curtains in cheerful stripes, all good signs. I swung my feet to the floor and confronted the day with heroic modesty. Kettle on, mug chosen, chipped edge turned carefully away. A small ceremony before the larger one. Tea in hand, I opened the back door and stepped into the garden. The air was cool and soft, like the inside of a folded towel. The mint smelled bright. The lavender promised to behave. The washing line, currently empty, looked like it was waiting for a rehearsal. The chair leaned against the shed exactly where I'd left it, quiet, patient, doing nothing in a very meaningful way. Big day, I told it, in the tone you'd use for a toddler about to be in a school play. I set the mug on the table and fetched the small dusting brush from the kitchen. If we were going to have a farewell, we would have a presentable guest of honor. I brushed the canvas gently, lifting a week's worth of dust and the occasional crumb I refused to identify. The bent leg received a comforting pat. There, I said, because I am the sort of person who comforts furniture. The cat joined us, sauntering over with the look of a professional supervisor arriving exactly when he intended. He sniffed the leg, circled twice, and sat down in the way that communicates. I shall oversee. I took out the notebook, wrote at the top of a fresh page, chair farewell, 4 o'clock, tea, biscuits, words underlined. Words, which was optimistic because my plan at that moment was mainly to point at the chair and say, thank you, and then wave my arms around to gather meaning from the breeze. I began with bunting. Not too much, just 2 polite strings, one along the shed, one looping the fence. The bunting was left over from a village fete, faded triangles in friendly colors that look good in every season. As I hung it, I thought about asking people. Not too many people, just the ones who already knew me well enough to accept that I was holding a farewell for a chair and not think I needed a physician. Susan, obviously. Mr. Ellis, because he is a fence away anyway. Maybe Daisy and her brother if they happen to be visiting. Mary from number 14 would bring a dish towel and an opinion. Peter from number 9 would bring a joke and a second joke, just in case. The list made itself. I wrote it down, felt suddenly brave. And then, because ceremony is fueled by carbohydrates, I set about baking. I want you to picture me at my most determined, apron tied like a promise, radio low and cheerful, mixing bowl steady. There is flour in my hair before I have even opened the bag. This is tradition. Scones seemed right. They look celebratory without trying too hard. They accept clotted cream with humility. They forgive you when you overwork them. And if they look a little lopsided, everyone calls it character. I sifted and stirred, rubbed butter into flour until it looked like damp sand and felt like confidence. A dash of sugar, a whisper of salt, milk in, brought together, not kneaded, patted into a round like a patient moon, cut into shapes that would not survive geometry class but would survive tea. Into the oven they went, and the kitchen began to smell like Sunday afternoon making friends with Friday evening. The cat arranged himself in the doorway and became a doormat with opinions. When the timer chimed, I opened the oven and felt the same impossible pride I always feel when cooked dough becomes bread. We are all magicians when the flour does what we ask. I set the scones on a rack and whispered, "Well done," to no one in particular. Then I added jam cream to the list with the flourish of a person who has a plan. Inviting people was mostly a matter of walking down the lane with a stack of tiny handwritten notes. Small thing in my garden at 4. Farewell to my faithful chair. Tea will be emotional. Biscuits will be supportive. I slipped one through Susan's letterbox with a little tap like a doorbell made of paper. I knocked at Mr. Ellis's. He opened the door in the cardigan that never retires, read the note, looked pleased and not at all surprised. Of course, he said. "I shall bring something appropriate," which could mean almost anything, but would be kind. Mary, from 14, received hers with such gravity, I briefly worried she thought the chair had been a relative. Peter, from 9, said, "Do we dress formal or business casual?" and then grinned and promised to bring custard creams. By the time I reached my own front gate again, the day felt like a soft drum roll. At 3, I set the table. Nothing fancy. A clean cloth, plates stacked like well-behaved hills, the scones under a tea towel that existed solely to create suspense, a pot of jam, a dish of cream, 2 jugs for tea because I mistrust a single teapot at a moment of consequence. I polished 4 spoons because it felt like gesture, and Polish 4 spoons sounds like a dance. The bunting moved lightly with the breeze, like the garden was sighing melodically. I took a deep breath and fetched the chair. We did a small practice. I stood the chair upright for a trial run in its favorite spot. It looked almost ready to work again, until you noticed the leg angled as if it had been caught doing something it shouldn't. I placed a little sprig of lavender on the arm. It felt right. A small corsage for a brave participant. The cat came to investigate, and with great ceremony, sat beside it like a guard with low energy. At 10 to 4, the first guest arrived. It was Mr. Ellis carrying a small frame wrapped in brown paper and string. "This," he said, eyes twinkling, "is from an old photo album, a picture of a deck chair on a beach in 1957. Look at the angle. Chairs have always been heroic." He set the frame on the table as if unveiling a treasure. There it was, a cheerful seaside, a windbreak, a hat. The chair at the center, facing the sea with confidence. I loved it immediately. We propped it against the teapot to watch over things. "Appropriate," I said. He inclined his head. The cardigan agreed. At 5 to 4, Susan burst through the gate with a ribbon and a plate covered in foil. "Emergency Victoria sponge," she declared, as if this were a recognized emergency service. "And the ribbon is for your feline assistant." The cat, upon seeing the ribbon, affected a sudden need to be elsewhere. We persuaded him with gentle compliments. At last, he allowed the ribbon to be draped across his shoulders like a sash for approximately 42 seconds. He looked magnificent. Then he removed it efficiently and hid it under the table leg with a paw. It was an honor just to be considered. We accepted the terms. Mary and Peter arrived precisely on time, both holding plates, both looking like they felt slightly ridiculous and entirely delighted. Mary had brought a cloth napkin with embroidered teacups. She placed it solemnly beneath the jam as though officiating at a ceremony involving sugar. Peter presented a very large packet of custard creams and whispered, "I don't trust emotional tea without backup," which is wisdom. At 4, the garden was gently full, not crowded, just enough. There's a wonderful human sound that I only notice in good gatherings, a soft, rolling murmur of voices, the occasional small laugh, the clink of cup on saucer, the impression of people at ease with one another. We took our seats. I stood next to the chair and cleared my throat as if I were about to address Parliament, which I clearly was not, but the moment liked a little theater. "Thank you for coming," I began, feeling foolish and happy all at once. "It has been brought to my attention that I am holding a farewell for an object. However, I would like to argue that this is really a thank you for a service rendered. This chair has held me, and cups of tea, and a frankly irresponsible number of biscuits through 9 summers. It has listened to my thoughts without interrupting. It has not judged my naps. And yesterday, when it decided it was done, it did not throw me. It placed me gently nearer the earth and said, "Look, a new view." I looked at the chair. It looked back as only chairs can. We understood each other. Susan raised her hand from the table like a student with a prepared remark. "Permission to offer a short tribute to the chair," she said, smiling. "Granted," I said, trying not to laugh. She stood and held up something small and glossy, a little certificate she had clearly made at home. "In recognition of exceptional services to tea and leisure," she read, "we present this Order of the Teaspoon to the canvas chair, retired with honors." She stuck it to the back of the chair with a tiny piece of tape and patted it like a medal. The garden applauded. Maybe only 5 pairs of hands, but it sounded like a festival. Even Mr. Ellis's radio, apparently listening from the other side of the fence, struck a jaunty chord. Mary stood next. "My own chair at home," she said, "has been faithful since 1998 and refuses to consider retirement. I don't sit in it so much as negotiate with it. I would like to offer this spoon, a proper dessert spoon, not one of your flimsy teaspoons, to accompany any future chair into service." She placed the spoon on the table with emphasis. "I promise to pass it on to the next generation of seating." Peter cleared his throat. He does this before deploying a joke he wants to land safely. "I once sat on a deck chair on a beach in Blackpool," he said, "and it collapsed so quickly I learned 3 new swear words from a nearby aunt. This, however, has been the most civilized lowering I have ever witnessed. I would like to present these custard creams as a salute to grace under pressure." We clapped again because clapping was clearly the order of the day. There was a pause then. That warm kind of quiet that is not empty. It is full of everything that is nice about people. I placed my hand lightly on the chair arm. "Thank you," I said, not trying to be clever. "Good job." I lifted the lavender sprig from the arm, held it for a moment, and then tucked it into the ribbon that Susan had retrieved from under the table leg and reintroduced as decorative, not compulsory. The cat made a small sound, which I chose to interpret as approval. We did not bury the chair. This is not that sort of story. We did, however, create a plan. Mr. Ellis, who is good with wood and gentle geometry, proposed we repurpose the canvas into 2 neat covers for outdoor cushions and 1 small shade for the little lamp on my garden table. I loved this immediately. It felt like reincarnation in a modest way. The bent leg, he said, could be straightened and cut to make a pair of plant stakes. "I shall bring my tools tomorrow," he added, with the air of a man who enjoys a practical epilogue. We toasted the idea with tea. The cat demanded a scone crumb tax. Tax was paid. The ceremony flowed naturally into the eating of things. I can report that scones taste better under bunting. They also taste better when your neighbor whispers, "You did. Good." Like it's a verdict rather than a compliment. The Victoria sponge performed excellently under pressure. The custard creams were consumed at a rate that suggested people had come prepared. We discussed the chair's most heroic moments. The great wasp standoff was reenacted using a sugar cube and a spoon. The teapot disaster was commemorated with a brief silence and a promise to always place lids on the hinge side. The robin summer led to a short tangent about bird bath etiquette and a spirited debate over whether robins are tiny landlords or just enthusiastic neighbors. At some point, Daisy and her brother arrived with Mr. Ellis's daughter. They had been visiting and were told there was an event. Daisy wore a hat shaped like a flower, as if the day had invited costumes, and she'd been prepared for this moment all year. Her brother's trainers flashed with lights each time he stepped, which made everything feel like a stage show. "We came to pay our respects," Daisy said, with the seriousness only children and judges can achieve. Her brother saluted the chair and then attempted to give it a sticker shaped like a star. The sticker did not adhere to canvas. He adhered it to my sleeve instead. Promotion accepted. Photographs happened. Susan took a group picture of us with the chair, one with the chair alone, because someone said, "It needs a proper portrait," and we all nodded as if this were published etiquette. One of the cat, who had arranged himself in front of the chair like a bodyguard on his lunch break. A picture of the little certificate, already slightly crooked in the sunshine. A picture of the bunting doing its gentle dance. When I look back, I think the garden must have known. The light was very kind. After a while, the afternoon softened. People began to drift into the small business of putting cups on trays and asking who wanted just a tiny bit more cream. Mary folded her embroidered napkin with ceremony. Peter looked toward the sky and predicted rain next Thursday, using an instinct I have never successfully challenged. Daisy checked under the table for imagined mice, found only the ribbon, and announced that she would make it into a badge for bravery later. We nodded. We approve of bravery in all sizes. By 5, the gathering thinned to just me and Susan, and the cat, who counts himself as 3 when food is present. We sat in the pleasant aftermath. Plates with crumbs, a pot of tea that insisted one more cup could be coaxed from it, bunting stirring like a contented sigh. "Do you feel better?" Susan asked, tipping her head toward the chair. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The little ceremony had done what ceremonies do when they are honest. It had noticed a thing that mattered. We had told the day that we saw it. We cleared in that easy way that happens when the work is not actually work. Dishes into the sink, leftover scones wrapped for later, 2 custard creams placed in a tin labeled buttons, which pleased me almost more than it should have. The cat escorted a crumb to the exact location on the patio where the sun warmed it properly for dining, then ate it with the mindfulness of a monk. The chair returned to its quiet lean against the shed, but it looked different now. Not lonely, represented, like a retired teacher who had been given a good assembly. As the shadow of the house stretched across the lawn, Mr. Ellis returned with a small soft pencil and a tape measure. Just to get a head start, he measured the canvas and nodded thoughtfully. "Plenty for 2 cushions," he said, "and the lampshade." He made notes in tidy capitals. Daisy caught a ladybird and released it ceremoniously onto the rose bush. Her brother stuck his star sticker on the watering can and declared it suitable for space. I nodded, as if this were entirely correct. At the very end, when the light was low and the garden had moved into its evening voice, we had one last cup of tea. This one without talking, just quiet. The good kind. The kind that tastes like accomplishment and sugar. I stood, finally, and smoothed the ribbon on the chair, reached up and untied the bunting from the shed, let it fall into my hands like a gentle curtain. The cat did a final patrol and declared the perimeter secure with a blink. We turned off the garden lamp, closed the back door softly. Before bed, I wrote in my notebook, "Chair farewell. People came. We ate things. We said thank you. We made a plan for new life. It mattered." I drew a little bunting triangle under the words. It was not art, but it was true. That night, I slept with the window cracked open so the garden could send in a few notes. A small breeze wandered through. A night bird called twice, and then decided it was enough. I dreamed of the chair becoming 2 cushions and a lampshade. In the dream, the cushions were very proud of themselves. They posed on the bench like dignitaries. The lampshade glowed like a well-kept secret. Morning arrived, tidy and calm. Mr. Ellis came by at 11 with a canvas needle and a face that said, "I brought practicality." We spread the chair on the table and marked the fabric. Susan arrived with the ribbon pinned to her sleeve and contributed a pair of nice scissors, the good ones that make everyone behave. The cat found the shade of the table and lay down as if we had built it for him. By lunchtime, we had 2 cushion covers cut and ready, and the bent leg was straightened and sawn into 2 neat plant stakes. We pushed them into the herb bed, and they stood there like thin, silver exclamation marks. The chair seat remained to become a lampshade. Tomorrow, we decided, tea first, always tea first. Later, when I sat on the kitchen bench with one of the new cushions behind me, I felt an odd little happiness, the kind that arrives quietly and sits on your shoulder. The garden looked back through the open door and seemed pleased with the whole proceeding. The chair had become part of the house again, different, but still here. It would continue to hold me in another way while I held my tea, and I liked that very much. So that was the day my garden chair collapsed in slow motion, and the day after, when we said goodbye by turning it into 3 small hellos. The sort of story that doesn't change the world, just our corner of it, just enough. The bunting went back in its tin. The ribbon found a permanent home on the watering can, space ready, according to our consultant. And on the fence, in a little frame, the beach chair from 1957 kept watch, reminding us that all good chairs look bravely at the day. We can do the same. We can sit. We can say thank you. We can eat a scone and call that a ceremony. We can turn endings into useful things. If you visit, I'll pour you tea. We'll sit on cushions that used to be a chair. We'll admire the lampshade when it's finished. We'll watch the cat conduct his important rounds. And when the breeze moves the mint, we'll nod like people who know how to celebrate the ordinary and get away with it. For now, lights low, day done, the garden remembers, and so do I. Also, there are 2 custard creams left in the buttons tin, which feels like winning at life. Just don't tell Peter. He'd insist on a rematch.